The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce should have meant a perfect Saturday afternoon. Instead, it became the day I learned that some people mistake kindness for weakness and silence for surrender. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how a neighborhood cookout turned into something I'll never forget. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Moving to Riverside, California had seemed like the perfect fresh start. After 8 years in the Army, including 2 deployments overseas, I was ready for something different. The small suburban neighborhood felt worlds away from the bases I'd called home, with its tree-lined streets and white picket fences. When I bought the little blue house on Maple Drive, my neighbors seemed friendly enough. Wave from the driveway, smile over the fence, the usual pleasantries. The Hendersons lived to my right. Tom worked in insurance, his wife Linda taught elementary school. They had twin boys, maybe 10 years old, who were always kicking soccer balls around their backyard. To my left were the Garcias, an older couple who kept the most beautiful rose garden I'd ever seen. Across the street, the Pattersons had lived there for 20 years, according to Linda, and knew everyone's business whether they wanted to or not. I kept to myself mostly, which seemed to suit everyone just fine. I'd wave when I saw people, helped Mrs. Garcia carry groceries when her arthritis was acting up, and once helped Tom Henderson jump his car battery. Simple neighbor stuff. I never mentioned my military background. It just never came up in casual conversation, and honestly, I was enjoying the anonymity. The invitation came on a Wednesday. Linda Henderson knocked on my door holding a bright yellow flyer, her smile a little too wide, like she was trying too hard. "Sarah, we're having our annual neighborhood barbecue this Saturday. You should totally come. It'll be fun. Everyone brings a dish to share, and Tom makes his famous ribs." I almost said no. After years of mandatory unit gatherings and mess hall meals, the idea of voluntary social eating felt exhausting. But Linda was standing there with such hopeful eyes, and I figured it was time to make more of an effort with the neighbors. "That sounds nice," I said. "What should I bring?" "Oh, anything. Salad, dessert, whatever you want. We start around 2, but people usually trickle in whenever. Very casual." Saturday afternoon, I found myself standing in my kitchen, staring at the potato salad I'd made. Classic recipe. Nothing fancy, just the way my grandmother taught me. I'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a simple green t-shirt. Casual, like Linda said. The Hendersons' backyard was already full of people when I walked through their side gate. Kids were running around with water balloons. Adults clustered in small groups with beer bottles and plastic cups. The smell of grilling meat filled the air, and someone had set up a speaker playing classic rock at a reasonable volume. I recognized most faces from around the neighborhood, though I didn't know many names. There was Janet Patterson from across the street, talking animatedly with her hands to a group of women I didn't recognize. The Kowalskis from 3 houses down were there with their teenage daughter. Mr. Chen, who lived on the corner, was helping Tom at the grill. "Sarah!" Linda appeared at my elbow. "You made it! And you brought something. You didn't have to do that." "Just potato salad," I said, holding up the covered bowl. "Nothing special." She led me to a long table covered with a checkered tablecloth, groaning under the weight of casserole dishes, fruit salads, and various desserts. I found a spot for my contribution between a tray of deviled eggs and what looked like homemade coleslaw. "Let me introduce you to some people," Linda said, already pulling me toward a group of women standing near the deck. The introductions were a blur of names I immediately forgot, and professions I nodded politely about. Janet Patterson turned out to be a real estate agent who'd, quote, sold half the houses in this neighborhood. There was Michelle something, who worked at the bank downtown, and her sister visiting from Phoenix. Everyone seemed nice enough, asking the usual questions about how I liked the neighborhood and what I did for work. "I'm between jobs right now," I said, which was technically true. I'd been discharged 3 months ago and was still figuring out what came next. The transition from military to civilian life was harder than I'd expected, and I wasn't ready to get into all of that with strangers at a barbecue. "Oh, that's tough," Janet said, her voice dripping with sympathy. The job market is so competitive these days. What's your background? Various things, I said vaguely. I'm exploring my options. The conversation moved on to other topics. Someone's vacation to Yellowstone, the new shopping center being built across town, complaints about the city's plan to repave Elm Street. I half listened, sipping a Coke and watching the kids play in the Hendersons' above-ground pool. It was actually pleasant. The sun was warm but not too hot, there was a nice breeze, and people seemed genuinely friendly. I started to relax for the first time in weeks. That's when Marcus Webb showed up. I noticed him immediately. Hard not to. He was the type of guy who wanted to be noticed. Pulling up in a lifted pickup truck with music thumping loud enough to hear 3 blocks away. He parked right in front of the Hendersons' house, taking up enough space for 2 cars, and climbed out wearing wraparound sunglasses and a tank top that showed off elaborate sleeve tattoos. "Marcus," Tom Henderson called from the grill, waving him over. "Glad you could make it." Apparently, Marcus was Tom's cousin, visiting from somewhere up north. He worked construction, he announced loudly to anyone within earshot, made good money, and wasn't afraid of hard work like some people these days. He grabbed a beer from the cooler and immediately launched into a story about some job site drama that involved a lot of profanity and complaints about lazy workers who don't know what real work looks like. I moved to the other side of the yard. But Marcus had a way of making his presence felt everywhere. His voice carried over every conversation. His opinions on everything from politics to sports to the right way to grill burgers. Some people seemed to enjoy his energy. Others looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I was refilling my drink at the beverage table when he appeared beside me. "You're the new girl, right, Sarah?" He was standing too close, and I could smell beer on his breath even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. "That's right," I said, taking a step back. "Tom told me you're unemployed. That's rough. Must be tough, not contributing. Just living off savings or whatever." There was something in his tone that set my teeth on edge. "I'm managing fine, thanks." Sure. "I'm just saying, there's plenty of work out there for people who really want it. I've been working since I was 16. Never taken a handout, never asked for help. Some people these days, they just expect things to be handed to them." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, are you talking about me specifically?" He shrugged, that infuriating gesture that said everything and nothing. Just making conversation, no offense. But there was offense, clearly intended. I could feel other people starting to notice our exchange. "None taken," I said evenly, and walked away. But Marcus wasn't done. 20 minutes later, I was standing by the fence talking with Mrs. Garcia about her prize-winning roses when Marcus's voice boomed across the yard again. "Hey, Sarah," he called out, loud enough that everyone turned to look. "Come settle an argument for us." I really didn't want to, but refusing would have caused more of a scene. Mrs. Garcia gave me an encouraging pat on the shoulder as I walked over to where Marcus stood with Tom, Mr. Chen, and a few other men I didn't recognize. "We were talking about respect," Marcus said, that same smirk playing at his lips. "You know how people earn it. Tom here thinks everyone deserves respect just for existing, but I say you gotta work for it. What do you think?" It was clearly a trap, but I wasn't sure what kind yet. "I think respect is something you give and receive based on how you treat people." "Right, exactly." Marcus slapped his knee like I'd made his point for him. "So someone who doesn't work, who just sits around collecting unemployment or whatever, how much respect do they really deserve?" The other men looked uncomfortable now. Tom cleared his throat. "Marcus, come on." "No, I'm serious. I'm up at 5 every morning, busting my back on construction sites, paying taxes. Meanwhile, some people just coast along expecting the world to take care of them." His eyes locked on mine. Makes you wonder what they even contribute to society. The blood rushed to my face so fast I felt dizzy. Around us, conversations had completely stopped. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. "Maybe you don't know people as well as you think you do," I said quietly. Marcus laughed, throwing his head back like I'd told the funniest joke. "Oh, I'm a pretty good judge of character. Take you, for example. Nice house, nice neighborhood, but no job? Someone's definitely paying your bills, and it ain't hard work." That's when Janet Patterson decided to jump in. Well, Marcus does have a point. I mean, Sarah, you've been here, 6 months, and you still haven't found work? In this economy, you really can't afford to be picky. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Maybe she's just not trying hard enough, added Michelle from the bank. There are plenty of entry-level positions available if someone really wants to work. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. These people who'd been perfectly pleasant an hour ago were now piling on, emboldened by Marcus's nastiness. I know it's hard to start over, Linda Henderson said, trying to sound sympathetic but somehow making it worse. But at some point, you have to take any job, right? Pride doesn't pay the bills. Pride, Marcus repeated, savoring the word. Yeah, that's the problem with your generation. Too proud to do real work. You probably think you're too good for manual labor. I never said anything about being too good for any kind of work. Didn't have to. It's written all over you. Soft hands, soft attitude. Bet you've never done a real day's work in your life. Mr. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, maybe we should change the subject. Why? This is educational. Sarah here is a perfect example of what's wrong with America today. No work ethic, no contribution, just taking up space and expecting others to carry the load. The worst part wasn't Marcus himself. Bullies existed everywhere, and I dealt with plenty over the years. The worst part was watching my neighbors nod along, murmur agreement, pile onto someone they barely knew based on assumptions and gossip. You know what I bet? Marcus continued, warming to his theme. I bet she's never faced any real adversity, never had to fight for anything. Just coast through life in easy mode, while real Americans did the heavy lifting. Mrs. Garcia had moved closer, her face tight with disapproval, but she was 80 years old and couldn't exactly take on a group of people half her age. The Kowalski family had quietly gathered their things and left. Smart move. Some people, Janet added, seem to think the world owes them something. Like they're special or different from the rest of us, who have to work for everything we get. Exactly, Marcus pointed at her like she'd solved a puzzle. Marcus faltered for just a second. I didn't say I served. But you're lecturing me about service and duty, so I'm curious about your military background. The yard had gone completely quiet now. Even the kids in the pool had stopped splashing. I don't need to have served to recognize service, Marcus said defensively, and I can tell you, sure as hell haven't. Can you? Something in my tone must have finally penetrated his beer-soaked confidence, because he took a half step back. Look at you, he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. Soft, weak, never faced a real challenge in your life. I smiled for the first time since this whole thing started. You know what, Marcus? You're absolutely right. I am soft. I've never faced any real challenges. Never had to prove myself to anyone. He looked confused, like he'd expected more of a fight. In fact, I continued, I'm so soft and useless that I probably couldn't even handle basic military training. You know, push-ups, running, following orders. That kind of thing would probably break someone like me. Janet Patterson was nodding agreement, but Tom Henderson was starting to look concerned. And you're definitely right about service, I went on. I've never served my country or my community, never put myself in harm's way for something bigger than myself. Never learned discipline or leadership or how to work as part of a team. Marcus was starting to look like he wanted this conversation to end, but he'd started it, and now he was stuck. I mean, what would someone like me know about real sacrifice? About being away from family for months at a time, about making life or death decisions under pressure. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the pool filter. What would I know, I said quietly, about serving 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat engineer, defusing IEDs and building infrastructure in active war zones? Marcus went very still. What would someone like me know about earning a Bronze Star for valor under fire? Or about coming home with tinnitus and nightmares but still proud of the job we did? The color was draining from his face now. You're right, Marcus. I'm just a soft, entitled woman who's never contributed anything to society, never earned any respect. I looked around at the faces staring at me. some shocked, some embarrassed, some beginning to look ashamed. "The funny thing is," I said, "I came here today hoping to get to know my neighbors better, maybe make some friends. I guess I did learn something about the people I'm living next to." That's when I heard the rumble of diesel engines turning onto Maple Drive. The sound was unmistakable, heavy military vehicles moving in formation. Everyone in the Henderson backyard turned toward the street as the rumbling got louder. But I knew what it was before anyone else could see it. 3 Humvees rolled down Maple Drive in perfect formation, their desert tan paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. They moved with the precision that only comes from countless hours of training, stopping in front of the Henderson house with mechanical synchronization. Marcus had gone completely white. What the hell? The first vehicle's door opened, and Sergeant First Class Rebecca Torres stepped out in full dress uniform. 6 feet tall, built like a brick wall, with ribbons and badges that told the story of 15 years of exemplary service. Behind her, 11 more soldiers emerged from the vehicles, each one moving with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who they are and what they're capable of. "Holy shit," someone whispered. Torres scanned the backyard until her eyes found mine. A smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile I'd seen all day. "Mitchell," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard over artillery fire. "There you are." The soldiers began moving toward the backyard gate in formation, their boots striking the pavement in unison. Tom Henderson stood frozen by his grill, spatula still in hand, looking like he was watching an alien invasion. "Afternoon, Sergeant Mitchell," Torres said as she reached me, snapping a crisp salute that I automatically returned. "Hope we're not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Sergeant Torres. What brings you to Riverside?" "Well, ma'am, we were in the area for training exercises at Fort Irwin, and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez here mentioned he knew where you lived." She gestured to a compact Latino man with kind eyes and scars on his hands. "Figured we'd stop by and check on our favorite EOD tech." Rodriguez stepped forward with a grin. "Good to see you, Mitchell. You look relaxed." "I was trying to be," I said, glancing at Marcus, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. The other soldiers had arranged themselves in a loose formation around the yard, not threatening exactly, but definitely present. Their uniforms were immaculate, their bearing professional, and their combined presence changed the entire atmosphere of the barbecue. "Ma'am," Torres said, her voice carrying just loud enough for everyone to hear, "I hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced. We've been talking about you since you left the unit." "All good things, I hope?" Specialist Amy Chen, no relation to Mr. Chen from the corner, laughed. "Are you kidding? We're still telling stories about that time in Kandahar when you talked your way past 3 Taliban checkpoints to deliver medical supplies to that village. Or when you defused that IED cluster outside the school in Helmand," added Corporal James Washington, a tall black man with gentle eyes and hands that could probably crush walnuts. "Saved about 200 kids that day." Torres nodded. "Command still talks about your innovation with the modified blast suits. Saved a lot of lives, that design." I felt heat creeping up my neck. "You guys are embarrassing me." "Good," said Rodriguez. "You never let us thank you properly for training half our unit. Best EOD instructor we ever had." The neighbors were staring openly now, their mouths hanging open like they were watching a movie. Janet Patterson looked like she'd swallowed her tongue. Linda Henderson had reappeared from the house and was standing in the doorway, her face cycling through about 6 different emotions. Marcus, meanwhile, had backed up so far he was almost against the fence. "Sergeant Mitchell," Torres continued, "I brought something I thought you'd want to see." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Letter from Captain Morrison. He wanted you to know that the bridge construction project you designed in Wardak Province was completed last month. First permanent river crossing that village has had in 50 years. My throat tightened. They finished it? Ahead of schedule. The local kids painted a mural on one of the supports, American and Afghan flags together, with "Thank you, Sergeant Sarah," in English, and Pashto. Specialist Lisa Park, a young Asian woman who couldn't have been more than 22, wiped her eyes. "We have pictures, ma'am. Want to see them later?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Tom Henderson finally found his courage. Excuse me, he said, approaching Torres with obvious nervousness. Are you folks hungry? We've got plenty of food. Torres looked around the yard, taking in the uncomfortable faces, the half-eaten plates abandoned on tables, the general atmosphere of tension that still hung in the air like smoke. That's very kind of you, sir, but we can't stay long. We just wanted to check on our sergeant here, make sure she's settling in okay to civilian life. She's been a wonderful neighbor, Mrs. Garcia said firmly, stepping forward despite her. Rodriguez was scanning the crowd with the same expression he used to wear when we were sweeping for hostile locals in Afghan markets. Everyone treating you well, Mitchell? No problems with the neighbors? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. I could feel every eye in the yard on me, waiting to see what I'd say. Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. No problems, I said quietly, just getting to know everyone. But Corporal Washington had noticed Marcus trying to make himself invisible by the fence. How about you, sir? He said, his voice perfectly polite but somehow carrying the weight of absolute authority. You've been making our sergeant feel welcome? Marcus mumbled something incomprehensible. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Washington said, taking a step closer. He wasn't threatening, just interested. But when a 6'4" combat veteran in full uniform asks you a question, you tend to answer clearly. Yes, Marcus managed. Very welcome. That's good to hear, Torres said, because Sergeant Mitchell here is family to us, and we take care of our family. The message was unmistakable, delivered with military precision and wrapped in perfect politeness. Specialist Chen had wandered over to the food table and was examining my potato salad. Hey Mitchell, this looks like your grandmother's recipe. The one you made for the 4th of July cookout on base. Same one, I confirmed. Damn, that was good. You remember Rodriguez? She made like 5 gallons of this stuff, and it was gone in 20 minutes. Best potato salad in the Army, Rodriguez agreed. Mitchell, you should enter this in contests or something. Janet Patterson, who had criticized my contributions to society not 30 minutes earlier, suddenly found her voice. It really is delicious, she said weakly. I had some earlier. Torres was watching the interactions with the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the best non-commissioned officers I'd ever served under. She didn't miss the subtle dynamics, the way people weren't quite meeting my eyes, the tension that had nothing to do with their surprise arrival. Sergeant Mitchell, she said, walk us back to the vehicles. We should probably head out soon. As we moved toward the street, the soldiers naturally formed a protective formation around me, not obvious to civilians, but unmistakable to anyone with military training. Torres fell into step beside me. Is everything really okay here? She asked quietly. It is now, I said. She nodded. Good. Because if it wasn't, well, we know where you live now. At the vehicles, the soldiers took turns saying goodbye. Hugs, handshakes, promises to stay in touch. Rodriguez pressed a card into my hand with his personal number. Chen made me promise to send her the potato salad recipe, even though she already had it. Park showed me pictures of the bridge on her phone, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. You know, Torres said as she prepared to get back in the lead vehicle, if civilian life gets boring, we could always use an EOD instructor at Fort Benning. The offer's always open. I'll keep that in mind. Do that, and Mitchell? She paused with one foot on the running board. You don't owe anyone an explanation for who you are. Some people earn the right to your story, others don't. The Humvees rumbled to life and pulled away with the same precision they'd arrived with, leaving behind the smell of diesel exhaust and a neighborhood that would never quite look at me the same way again. I stood in the street for a moment, watching them disappear around the corner, then turned back toward the backyard where my neighbors were still standing exactly where I'd left them, looking like they'd just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. His truck was gone too. Time to go back and finish this conversation. Walking back through the gate felt like entering a different world than the one I'd left 10 minutes earlier. The same people stood in roughly the same positions, but everything had changed. The air itself felt different, charged with embarrassment, shame, and the kind of awkward tension that comes when people realize they've made a terrible mistake. Tom Henderson was the first to approach me, his face red with mortification. Sarah, Jesus, I had no idea. I'm so sorry about Marcus. He's family, but that doesn't excuse. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I should have stopped him sooner. It's not your fault, Tom. You can't control what other people say. But he shook his head vigorously. No, it is my fault. This is my house, my party. I let my cousin attack a guest in my backyard, and I just stood there. That's on me. Linda appeared at his shoulder, her eyes red-rimmed. We're both sorry, Sarah. So incredibly sorry. I don't know what got into people today. We're not usually like this. I wanted to believe that, but the truth was more complicated. They weren't usually like this, because they usually didn't have a target. Remove the social restraints, add some alcohol and a mob mentality, and apparently decent people could turn ugly pretty quickly. Mrs. Garcia shuffled over, moving faster than I'd seen her move in months. Mija, she said, reaching up to pat my cheek with her weathered hand. I am so proud to have you as my neighbor. So proud. Those people, they should be ashamed. Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. That means a lot. My late husband served in Vietnam, Army engineer, like you. He would have loved to meet you. Her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. He always said the real heroes are the ones who never talk about what they did. The crowd was starting to fragment. Some people were making quiet excuses and leaving. The Kowalskis had already disappeared, and I watched several other families gather their dishes and slip away without saying goodbye. Whether they were embarrassed by their behavior or just uncomfortable with the situation, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. But others stayed, and their faces told different stories. Mr. Chen approached with measured steps, his expression serious. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I didn't participate in what happened, but I didn't stop it either. In my country, we have a saying, silence in the face of injustice is complicity. I was complicit today. Mr. Chen, you don't need to. Yes, I do. He bowed slightly, a formal gesture that felt both sincere and heartbreaking. I dishonored myself and my family by staying silent. It will not happen again. Janet Patterson was a different story entirely. She stood by the beverage table, clutching a plastic cup like a shield, her real estate agent smile nowhere to be found. When our eyes met, she looked away quickly, suddenly very interested in the ice melting in the cooler. Michelle from the bank had vanished entirely, along with her sister from Phoenix. But then there were surprises. David Kowalski's teenage daughter, Emma, came back through the gate by herself. She couldn't have been more than 16, all legs and nervous energy. But she walked right up to me with the kind of determination that reminded me of some of the young soldiers I'd trained. Ms. Mitchell? I'm Emma Kowalski, from down the street. I remember. Is everything okay? She glanced around nervously, then squared her shoulders. I wanted to apologize for leaving earlier. My parents thought it was getting too intense, but I should have stayed. I should have said something when that guy was being horrible to you. This kid was apologizing for her parents' reasonable decision to remove their family from a volatile situation. Emma, you didn't do anything wrong. But I didn't do anything right either. My history teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, he's a veteran too, Marines. He always talks about how we have a responsibility to speak up when we see injustice. I didn't do that today. I studied her face, seeing something rare and precious. A young person wrestling with moral complexity and choosing the harder path. What would you have said? I don't know. Something. Anything. That what he was saying wasn't okay. That judging people without knowing them is wrong. She paused, chewing her lip. That serving your country is something to be proud of, not something to hide. Smart kid. You're right about all of that. I'm going to do better next time, she said firmly. I promise. I believe you will. After Emma left, rejoining her parents, who were waiting diplomatically at the end of the driveway, Tom Henderson cleared his throat loudly enough to get everyone's attention. I need to say something to everyone, he announced. What happened here today was wrong. Sarah Mitchell is a decorated combat veteran who served our country with honor and distinction. She earned a Bronze Star for valor under fire, and she's done more for America in one deployment than most of us will do in our entire lives. A few people nodded, but many looked uncomfortable with the public reckoning. More than that, Tom continued, she's been a good neighbor. She's helped people, been polite and friendly, and asked for nothing in return. Today, we treated her like garbage based on assumptions and gossip, and I'm ashamed of all of us. Linda stepped forward. I think we should all take a hard look at ourselves after this. I know I need to. Janet Patterson finally found her voice. Well, how were we supposed to know? She never said anything about being in the military. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Several people turned to stare at Janet, who seemed to realize immediately that she'd said exactly the wrong thing. Janet, Tom said quietly, that's not the point. But it kind of is, isn't it? Janet's real estate training was kicking in. When in doubt, double down. If someone has that kind of background, wouldn't you expect them to mention it? It's not like it's a secret, right? Mrs. Garcia made a sound of disgust. Ay, Dios mío, you still don't understand. Understand what? I decided to answer that one myself. The point, Janet, is that my military service, or lack thereof, shouldn't matter. You all decided I was worthless based on the fact that I don't currently have a traditional job. My value as a human being and a neighbor shouldn't depend on whether I can produce a resume that meets your approval. But nothing. If I had been a single mother struggling to find work, would that make Marcus's behavior okay? If I was disabled, or dealing with mental health issues, or just down on my luck, would that justify publicly humiliating me at a neighborhood barbecue? Janet's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The problem isn't that I didn't tell you about my military service, I continued. The problem is that you thought it was acceptable to treat another human being the way you treated me today, regardless of their background. Silence settled over the remaining group like a heavy blanket. Mr. Chen nodded slowly. She is correct. We failed as neighbors and as people. I don't think I failed at anything, Janet said defensively. I was just making conversation. That was apparently the last straw for Mrs. Garcia. Despite being barely 5 feet tall and 80 years old, she rounded on Janet with the fury of someone who'd survived the Depression, buried a husband, and raised 5 children. Conversation? She snapped. You call attacking someone conversation? You call judging and insulting someone conversation? Shame on you, Janet Patterson. Shame on all of you who went along with that horrible man. Janet's face went red. I didn't attack anyone. You piled on, Mrs. Garcia shot back, like vultures. Like cowards. And now you want to blame Sarah for not giving you her life story so you could decide if she deserved basic human decency? The fight went out of Janet completely. She set down her cup and gathered her purse. I think I should go. I think that's a good idea, Mrs. Garcia agreed. After Janet left, the remaining group stood in awkward silence for several minutes. The party was clearly over, even though it was barely 6 o'clock. People began the slow process of cleaning up, gathering their dishes, making stilted small talk about anything other than what had just happened. Tom and Linda insisted on walking me home, even though it was literally next door. We stood on my front porch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah, Linda said, I hope you can forgive us. All of us. We showed you the worst of ourselves today. Some of you did, I agreed. But not all. Mrs. Garcia stood up for me. Mr. Chen owned his mistakes. Emma came back to apologize. There's still good in this neighborhood. Tom looked relieved. Does that mean you'll stay? I'd understand if you wanted to move after this. I looked down Maple Drive, at the tree-lined street that had seemed so peaceful when I'd first moved here. At the houses where my neighbors lived their complicated, imperfect lives. At Mrs. Garcia's rose garden, visible from my porch, where she'd probably be watering her flowers tomorrow morning like always. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally. This is my home now, the good and the bad. They said their goodnights and headed back to finish cleaning up their backyard. I stayed on the porch for a while, watching the stars come out and thinking about the strange turns life could take. Inside, I found Rodriguez's card still in my pocket and decided to send him a text. Thanks for today, perfect timing as always. His response came back almost immediately. Anytime, Mitchell, that's what family does. Family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I'd chosen and that had chosen me back. Sometimes that was enough to get you through the difficult days. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations with neighbors, who were trying to figure out how to look me in the eye again. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. 3 weeks later, I was reorganizing my garage when I heard a car door slam in the Henderson driveway. Through my side window, I watched Marcus Webb climb out of his pickup truck, moving with less swagger than I remembered. He'd apparently decided to make another visit to his cousin. I kept working, sorting through boxes of gear I'd accumulated over 8 years of military life. Some things were worth keeping. My field manuals, a few pieces of equipment that had sentimental value, photos from various deployments. Other items were headed for donation or the trash. About an hour later, there was a knock on my front door. Marcus stood on my porch looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Gone were the wraparound sunglasses and cocky attitude. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Sarah, I was wondering if could we talk for a minute?" I considered several responses, most of them involving the word no, but curiosity won out. What about? About what happened at the barbecue. I owe you an apology. I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. Go ahead. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Look, I was drunk, and I said some things I shouldn't have said. Tom told me about your military service, and I feel like an ass. You should. Yeah, I know that now. He finally looked up, and I was surprised to see genuine remorse in his eyes. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks, and I can't get it out of my head. The way I treated you was wrong. It was. I don't know if this makes it better or worse, but I want you to know that I'm not usually like that. I mean, I can be a loudmouth, and I definitely drink too much sometimes, but I don't usually attack people. I don't know what got into me that day. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. What I saw instead was a man genuinely wrestling with his own behavior, trying to understand how he'd become someone he didn't recognize. "What do you think got into you?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I think I was jealous. That wasn't the answer I'd expected. Jealous of what? Of you having your shit together. Nice house, nice neighborhood, seeming all calm and confident. I've been working construction for 15 years, and I'm still living paycheck to paycheck in a crappy apartment. Seeing someone who looked like they had it figured out. I guess it pushed some buttons. It was more self-awareness than I'd given him credit for. So, you decided to tear me down. Yeah, which makes me a bully and a coward. He rubbed his face with both hands. My dad was like that. Always had to put someone else down to feel better about himself. Swore I'd never be that guy. But you were that guy. That day, you absolutely were. Some of you did, I agreed. But not all. Mrs. Garcia stood up for me. Mr. Chen owned his mistakes. Emma came back to apologize. There's still good in this neighborhood. Tom looked relieved. Does that mean you'll stay? I mean, I'd understand if you wanted to move after this. I looked down Maple Drive, at the tree-lined street that had seemed so peaceful when I'd first moved here. At the houses where my neighbors lived their complicated, imperfect lives. At Mrs. Garcia's rose garden, visible from my porch, where she'd probably be watering her flowers tomorrow morning like always. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally. This is my home now, the good and the bad. They said their goodnights and headed back to finish cleaning up their backyard. I stayed on the porch for a while, watching the stars come out and thinking about the strange turns life could take. Inside, I found Rodriguez's card still in my pocket and decided to send him a text. Thanks for today, perfect timing as always. His response came back almost immediately. Anytime, Mitchell, that's what family does. Family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I'd chosen and that had chosen me back. Sometimes that was enough to get you through the difficult days. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations with neighbors, who were trying to figure out how to look me in the eye again. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. 3 weeks later, I was reorganizing my garage when I heard a car door slam in the Henderson driveway. Through my side window, I watched Marcus Webb climb out of his pickup truck, moving with less swagger than I remembered. He'd apparently decided to make another visit to his cousin. I kept working, sorting through boxes of gear I'd accumulated over 8 years of military life. Some things were worth keeping. My field manuals, A few pieces of equipment that had sentimental value, photos from various deployments. Other items were headed for donation or the trash. About an hour later, there was a knock on my front door. Marcus stood on my porch looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Gone were the wraparound sunglasses and cocky attitude. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Sarah, I was wondering if I could we talk for a minute?" I considered several responses, most of them involving the word no, but curiosity won out. What about? About what happened at the barbecue. I owe you an apology. I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. Go ahead. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Look, I was drunk, and I said some things I shouldn't have said. Tom told me about your military service, and I feel like an ass. You should. Yeah, I know that now. He finally looked up, and I was surprised to see genuine remorse in his eyes. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks, and I can't get it out of my head. The way I treated you was wrong. It was. I don't know if this makes it better or worse, but I want you to know that I'm not usually like that. I mean, I can be a loudmouth, and I definitely drink too much sometimes, but I don't usually attack people. I don't know what got into me that day. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. What I saw instead was a man genuinely wrestling with his own behavior, trying to understand how he'd become someone he didn't recognize. What do you think got into you? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I think I was jealous. That wasn't the answer I'd expected. Jealous of what? Of you having your shit together. Nice house, nice neighborhood, seeming all calm and confident. I've been working construction for 15 years, and I'm still living paycheck to paycheck in a crappy apartment. Seeing someone who looked like they had it figured out. I guess it pushed some buttons. It was more self-awareness than I'd given him credit for. So, you decided to tear me down. Yeah, which makes me a bully and a coward. He rubbed his face with both hands. My dad was like that. Always had to put someone else down to feel better about himself. Swore I'd never be that guy. But you were that guy. That day, you absolutely were. She set down her coffee cup and fixed me with a look that reminded me of my grandmother, equal parts warmth and steel. Because it was right. Because I raised 5 children and I know bullying when I see it. Because my husband taught me that when good people stay silent, bad people think they speak for everyone. It could have made things uncomfortable for you in the neighborhood. Sarah, I'm 80 years old. I survived the Depression, raised children through the Cold War, and buried a husband after 52 years of marriage. You think I'm worried about uncomfortable conversations with Janet Patterson? I burst out laughing, nearly spilling coffee all over her tablecloth. When you put it like that. Exactly. Life is too short to worry about what small people think. Besides, she winked, I knew there was more to you than met the eye. Military bearing is hard to hide when you know what to look for. You could tell. Misha, my husband was in the army for 26 years. I know how soldiers walk, how they stand, how they watch a room. You had all the signs. After I left Mrs. Garcia's house, I found myself thinking about the community in a different way. Not as a group of people who happen to live near each other, but as something more complex. A web of relationships, conflicts, alliances, and shared experiences that could either support you or tear you down, depending on how you navigated it. That evening, Emma Kowalski knocked on my door with a school project in her hands, a report on modern military conflicts that she was writing for her history class. Mr. Rodriguez said I should interview a veteran if possible, she explained, and I was hoping, would you mind answering some questions? We spent 2 hours at my kitchen table, talking about everything from the logistics of military deployments to the psychological challenges of coming home. Emma was a thoughtful interviewer, asking questions that showed she'd done her research and genuinely wanted to understand rather than just complete an assignment. One more question, she said as she packed up her notebook. Do you think what happened at the barbecue changed how people see you in the neighborhood? Probably. The question is whether it changed how they see themselves. She thought about that for a moment. Do you think people can really change? Like fundamentally change who they are? I think people can change how they act, which over time can change who they are. But it takes work, and it takes wanting to be different. Like Marcus apologizing to you? I was surprised she knew about that. How did you hear about that? Small neighborhood. Word gets around, she grinned. So do you think he meant it? I think he's trying to mean it. Whether he follows through remains to be seen. After Emma left, I realized something had shifted in how I thought about Maple Drive. It was no longer the idyllic suburban street I'd imagined when I bought the house. But it wasn't the hostile environment I'd experienced at the barbecue either. It was something more realistic and ultimately more valuable. A place where people made mistakes, owned up to them or didn't, and had to figure out how to live together despite their differences. Real community, it turned out, wasn't about everyone getting along perfectly. It was about what happened when they didn't, and whether they could find their way back to something better. 6 months after the barbecue incident, I was installing new security lighting in my backyard when I heard the familiar sound of multiple vehicles pulling up to the Henderson house. This time, though, it wasn't military Humvees. It was minivans, SUVs, and pickup trucks loaded with camping chairs and coolers. The Hendersons were hosting their second annual neighborhood barbecue. I watched through my kitchen window as families began arriving, kids racing around with the manic energy that comes with the promise of hot dogs and swimming. Tom was already at his grill, wearing a new apron that read Grill Sergeant, Linda's attempt at military humor that somehow managed to be both cheesy and endearing. The invitation had come 3 weeks ago, hand-delivered by Linda herself. She'd stood on my porch, fidgeting with her hands, clearly nervous about how I'd respond. "We completely understand if you don't want to come," she'd said. "After what happened last time, well, we just wanted you to know you're welcome. More than welcome. We'd really like you to be there." I'd told her I'd think about it, which I had been doing ever since. The truth was, I'd been debating whether to even stay in Riverside. The job market for former EOD techs wasn't great in small California towns, and I had been offered a position with a private security firm in San Diego. Good money, interesting work, a chance to use my skills in a civilian context. But there was something about running away that didn't sit right with me. I'd never retreated from a challenge before, and I wasn't sure I wanted to start now. A knock on my front door interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Garcia stood on my porch wearing a floral dress and her best pearls, carrying a covered dish that smelled like heaven. "Mija, are you ready? We're going to be late for the party." "Mrs. Garcia, I haven't decided if I'm going yet." She gave me the look that had probably terrified her 5 children into good behavior. "Sarah Mitchell, you are going to that barbecue, end of discussion." "But..." "No buts. You cannot let fear keep you from living your life. Besides, I made tres leche cake and I'm too old to carry it by myself." She had a point about the cake. It looked heavy. "Fine," I said, grabbing the potato salad I'd made just in case. "But if it gets weird, we're leaving." Deal. The Henderson backyard looked almost identical to how it had 6 months ago, but the atmosphere was completely different. People were actually relaxed. Conversations flowed naturally, and kids played without the undercurrent of adult tension that had marked the previous gathering. Emma Kowalski spotted me first and bounded over with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just gotten her driver's license and wanted to tell everyone about it. "Ms. Mitchell, you came. Did you see my article?" "What article?" She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. "The one I wrote for the school newspaper about military veterans in our community. Mr. Rodriguez helped me expand my interview with you into a full-feature story." I read the headline, "Local Veterans Service Goes Beyond Deployment." The article was well written, focusing on the challenges of transitioning to civilian life and the importance of community support for veterans. It managed to tell my story without sensationalizing the barbecue incident, instead using it as a jumping-off point to discuss broader issues. "Emma, this is really good work." "Thanks. It's getting reprinted in the city newspaper next week, and I got an A+ on my original report." Tom Henderson appeared with a beer in one hand and tongs in the other. "Sarah, I'm so glad you made it. Can I get you something to drink?" "Just a Coke, thanks." "Coming right up. And hey, thank you for inspiring Emma's article. It's made a lot of people in the neighborhood think about things differently." As the afternoon progressed, I found myself actually enjoying the party. The guest list was different this time. Some faces from the previous barbecue were notably absent, while others had joined for the first time. The conversation was easier, less charged with the kind of social competition that had poisoned the previous gathering. Mr. Chen sought me out to show me pictures of his grandson's graduation from the military academy. He wants to be an engineer like you, he said proudly. Says he wants to build bridges instead of walls. Smart kid, the world needs more bridge builders. Indeed. Speaking of which, I have been meaning to ask, have you given any thought to teaching? The community college is looking for instructors in their new veterans education program. I hadn't heard about that. What kind of program? Job training, life skills, transition support. They need someone with real experience to help design the curriculum. Someone who understands both military life and civilian challenges. It was an intriguing idea. Teaching had always appealed to me, and helping other veterans navigate the transition I was still figuring out myself felt meaningful. I'll look into it, I promised. Around 5 o'clock, a familiar pickup truck pulled up in front of the Henderson house. Marcus Webb climbed out, but this version of Marcus moved with less bravado and more purpose. He'd lost some weight, and his clothes were cleaner, better fitting. I watched him scan the backyard until his eyes found mine. He raised a hand in greeting, not approaching, but acknowledging my presence. I nodded back. Mrs. Garcia, who missed nothing, followed my gaze. He's been coming to AA meetings at the community center. My friend volunteers there. Says he's been regular for 4 months now, really working the program. People could surprise you. Sometimes in terrible ways, sometimes in hopeful ones. Later, as the sun began to set and the party started winding down, Linda Henderson gathered everyone around for what she called gratitude sharing, apparently a new tradition she was trying to establish. I just want to say, she began, that I'm grateful for all of you. This neighborhood means so much to Tom and me, and having everyone here tonight feels like a blessing. It was corny, but sincere. People began sharing small appreciations. Thanks for borrowed tools, help with sick pets, watching packages while neighbors were out of town. The ordinary kindnesses that actually held communities together. When it was my turn, I surprised myself by standing up. I'm grateful, I said, for second chances. For neighbors who are willing to look past first impressions and mistakes. For the reminder that home isn't just a place you live, but a place where people know your story and still choose to welcome you. Mrs. Garcia wiped her eyes. Emma Kowalski beamed. Tom Henderson raised his beer in a small salute. As the gathering broke up and people began the familiar ritual of loading leftovers into containers and folding chairs, Marcus approached me by the dessert table. Sarah, I wanted you to know that I took your advice. About what? About speaking up when I see someone being treated badly. There was an incident at a job site last week. Some guys were harassing a new worker, really laying into him for being different. And I remembered what you said about using how I felt after our encounter to do better. What did you do? I told them to knock it off. When they didn't, I got the foreman involved. Turned out the new guy was a veteran too, dealing with some PTSD issues. The harassment stopped. I studied his face, looking for signs of self-congratulation or manipulation. What I saw instead was a man quietly proud of doing the right thing without expecting a reward for it. That was good of you, Marcus. It felt good. Different than I expected, but good. As I walked home with Mrs. Garcia, our arms linked for mutual support on the uneven sidewalk, she squeezed my elbow. So, mija, have you decided about San Diego? I was constantly amazed by how much this woman knew about my life. How did you? Your mail carrier is my nephew. He mentioned seeing some official-looking letters from security companies. Small towns. Everything was connected to everything else. I think I'm going to stay, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Mr. Chen mentioned a teaching opportunity, and I've been thinking about starting my own consulting business. Security assessments for small businesses, that kind of thing. Good. This place needs you, not because you're a veteran or because of what you did in the war, but because of who you are. Someone who stands up, who doesn't run from hard things, who makes people better just by expecting more from them. We reached her front gate, and she turned to face me in the porch light. You know what the difference is between a neighborhood and a community? What? A neighborhood is just houses near each other. A community is what happens when people decide to care about each other despite their differences. Today felt like a community. The next morning, I called the community college to ask about the Veterans Education Program. The conversation lasted 2 hours and ended with me scheduling a meeting to discuss curriculum development. That afternoon, I drafted a business plan for Mitchell Security Consulting. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching Mrs. Garcia water her roses and Tom Henderson teach his twin boys how to throw a football in the fading light. Across the street, Emma Kowalski was washing her parents' car to earn extra driving privileges. It wasn't the perfect suburban dream I'd imagined when I first moved to Maple Drive. It was better than that. It was real, complicated, and entirely my own. My phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Torres. "How's civilian life treating you, Mitchell?" I typed back, "Turns out it's a lot like military life. Messy, challenging, and full of people trying to figure it out as they go. In other words, exactly where I'm supposed to be." Her response came immediately. "Outstanding. Stay strong, soldier." I smiled, tucked the phone into my pocket, and settled back to watch my neighborhood come alive in the gentle chaos of an ordinary evening. Home, it turned out, wasn't a place you found. It was a place you built, one conversation, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And sometimes, if you were lucky, other people helped you build it. The end. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.